I lost a very close male family member to suicide 1 year ago.
Mm.
And of course, I've always been very passionate about helping people with mental health, right? And I used to work for psychiatric mobile response team for LA County. I used to like interview, assess, and hospitalize people who are suicidal.
Mm.
Um, so I but after losing a very close loved one to suicide a year ago, it kind of like really made me realize, and I did a lot more research, which I already knew, right? There's like the discrepancy between the rates at which women seek therapy or help and
Mm.
men. It's a lot lower for men. And a lot of it has to do with stigma, has to do with cultural conditioning, societal norms, and things like that. So I realized after this suicide that, it's really important to destigmatize, first of all,
Mm.
help for men, like men seeking help, and especially mental health, emotional mental health. And not only to destigmatize it, but also have places where men can feel safe to go seek help. And so that's how that's what made me decide to kind of like specialize in men's mental health.
Parenting is tough stuff, and we need all the help we can get. Am I right? Well, today our special guest is a licensed clinical social worker, a therapist who specializes in conscious parenting, and she's here to share with us her words of wisdom and her almost 20 years of experience focusing on parenting and mental health, and specifically men's mental health and the importance of working on healing the inner child so we can be more effective parents. So stick around, you don't want to miss this one. And without further ado, Silva, how are you today?
Yes, I'm well. How about you?
I'm fantastic. I'm so excited to have you on today. Thank you for joining us and sharing your words of wisdom in this super important area of mental health, men's mental health, and parenting. I think there's a lot of work to be done here, and I'm so excited to learn more about what you're doing in the field.
Thank you, Patrick. Thanks for having me.
Ah, my pleasure. Do you want to share a little bit about your background, what got you into this specific work as a therapist?
Yeah, sure. So I'm going to start from my childhood because I think that's where the seeds were planted. So I'm an immigrant, and we moved here. We moved to the USA in the late 80s, and I started first grade. So when I started school, public school, I didn't know a word of English, and I remember just feeling so confused, and my classmates wouldn't talk. I couldn't make friends because I didn't even speak the language, and so a lot of kids were mean to me. They would kind of laugh. I didn't like, they would say things in English and then kind of laugh and run away. And I had no idea what they were saying, but I just remember being humiliated. But then there were a few kids that like tried to befriend me and try to talk to me, and they started teaching me English, right? So then from that very young age, seven-ish, I started becoming very inquisitive and like questioning, like, how come some kids are nice and others are, mean, right? Like at that age, it's like very black and white, like
Sure,
good, bad,
absolutely.
right? So, um, and I just became very inquisitive. And then even in middle school and high school, I had a lot of challenges because I grew up in a very strict family. So, for example, in high school, a lot of the girls would be wearing makeup at school, and my parents didn't allow me to wear makeup, right?
Hmm.
And I remember the girls used to so they would, like, peer pressure. They would say, why aren't you wearing makeup? And I would say, because my parents don't allow it, and they would laugh
Mm.
um, at me. And so I thought, okay, well, why are some people so mean, right? So I just was really, really interested kind of in like the human nature, like the human condition. Why are people different? Why are some kids, more obedient and others not, right? So it kind of started from there. And then I went to college. I started college. I actually started as an accounting major because I love numbers and
Hmm.
just love numbers. And then in my first year of college, I took a Psych 101 class, and I was completely blown away when I started learning human, like, psychology, like Pavlov's dog, right? Classical conditioning, all that stuff, like the basic.
Oh yeah, good stuff.
And I remember thinking, oh my God, this is where I could get all my answers. All those questions that I had been asking myself as, a kid, why, some people are this way, why others are that way. I realized that psychology answers those questions. And so I literally, like, even before finishing my first year of college, I went to my academic counselor and I changed my major to therapy, like, I'm sorry, psychology.
Hmm.
I was like, I want to be a therapist. I want to help people. So that's, very at a very young age. I'm one of the lucky ones because a lot of people, are not able to find their passion in life
Hmm.
at such a young age. But from age 8, like I was 18, almost 19, I was like, I'm going to be a therapist. So that's how that's where it all started. And then so I got my bachelor's in psychology. Then I started working as a children's social worker for LA County about 12 years. During that time, I went back to school, got my master's in social work, started doing my hours, my clinical hours, and then took my, exam and I became licensed. So, but basically, that's just kind of where it started.
Wow, and that's wonderful. Absolutely. I certainly didn't have that clarity starting off. I was a
Mm,
hot mess. I didn't have any idea what I was doing when I started college. I changed my
yeah.
major like 6 times.
Oh,
And really, I mean, therapy was kind of like the last stop for me. So I actually was gung ho about being a pharmacist, right? And I'm horrible at sciences, so that should tell you something. So yeah,
yeah.
I really respect that. I think it's great when you have that clarity and that single mindedness about your passions. I certainly didn't have that. I had to thumb my way through it. First generation college student, definitely had very little direction. And so I had to, yeah, literally just trial and error, figure out, and I'm very glad that I ended up in counseling. It's definitely
Mhm.
feeds my soul, being of service to other people. I was a waiter all through college,
Oh,
for 11 years, asking people, hey, how do you want your eggs? Denny's, for anybody who knows me.
yeah.
And I loved being a waiter, and that even as a therapist, 12 plus years in, I still sometimes think, it's not all that different. Being of service is being of service, and we
Exactly.
find our special way to do that. Um, but it's about human connection, right?
Mhm.
And in terms of clarity, I knew that's what I wanted, and that's actually the reason I turned to coat on pharmacy schools because I was trying to make peace with that. I was like, do I really want to be stuck behind a desk? Is that, when I love working one on one with people. And for me, it was about, I think, more the status, trying to run
Mhm.
away from poverty.
Mhm.
So whenever
Mhm.
somebody would say like something like social work to me, I had no idea what
Mhm.
they were
Mhm.
talking about. I just thought about, people getting their kids taken away and stuff. And I didn't really,
Mhm.
and working with people in poverty, it didn't, and I was like, no, I'm trying to run away from that.
Mhm. Mhm. Mhm.
But once I stepped foot in a tour of the school I ended up going to at Loma Linda, and I had the aha moment and it clicked. I was like, oh yeah, right? It makes sense now.
Mhm.
Like I get it. Yes, this is where I need to be. But that was funny enough. My first actual exposure to mental health was not until I was touring the graduate school, and I had taken a 180 from. And to be fair, I majored in sociology and I fell in love with kind of
Mhm.
like you did when you took Psych 101,
Mhm. Mhm.
right? With people and the idea of
Mhm.
how why people make the decisions they do in society. And
Yeah.
I really fell in love with social theory, so and humanities, and I was much more at home with that than I was with the sciences. I was trying to force the
Mhm.
sciences and pre-med and all that, and it was an uphill
Mm.
battle, and I knew that. And I think when I finally made peace with the fact, like, oh, I belong in humanities, like that's when
Mhm.
things went a lot smoother, starting from graduate school. So,
Yeah.
but I'm
Right.
glad you knew on the front end. I'm
I
sure
know.
it made your trajectory a lot, at least smoother college
Mhm.
wise, is having that clarity.
Definitely. Like I said, very lucky. Most people don't, and it's understandable. Like at 18, you're still a child in a way,
Sure,
It's
most
like,
definitely.
what do you know about life? But luckily, I happened to, discover it. Yeah.
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 So you decided you want to be a therapist. Did you always know you wanted to work in men's mental health? Like when did that take root?
Yeah. Uh, no, I didn't always know. Actually, this is a very recent kind of like development in my life. I lost a very close male family member to suicide 1 year ago.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, I've always been very passionate about helping people with mental health, right? And I used to work for psychiatric mobile response team for LA County. I used to like interview, assess, and hospitalize people who are suicidal.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so I, but after losing a very close loved one to suicide a year ago, it kind of like really made me realize, and I did a lot more research, which I already knew, right? There's like the discrepancy between the rates at which women seek therapy or help and
Mm-hmm.
men. It's a lot lower for men. And a lot of it has to do with stigma, has to do with cultural conditioning, societal norms, and things like that. So I realized after this suicide that, it's really important to destigmatize, first of all,
Mm-hmm.
help for men, like men seeking help, and especially mental health, emotional mental health. And not only to destigmatize it, but also have places where men can feel safe to go seek help. And so that's how that's what made me decide to kind of like specialize in men's mental health.
Yeah, it's definitely a gap, and I think, anyone who's been in this field long enough knows there's a huge discrepancy in our caseloads
Mhm.
between men and women, right? I mean, women make up the majority of therapy clients, and it's getting a little bit better with mental health awareness campaigns,
Mhm.
and especially with celebrities stepping out and normalizing it a bit more. But there is definitely still that barrier between men and feeling it's safe, right? As a whole to ask for help. And
Right.
it's really what we're talking about. It's not just mental health, but it's about the idea that, I I need help. I can't do this on my own. A lot of men are brought up to believe, you don't talk about your feelings. You don't
Mhm.
show your belly. You don't admit you're struggling because you're supposed to be, quote, the provider or the stoic one or
Exactly.
and a lot of it's cultural, but even across cultures we see this is the case,
Sure.
right?
Societal. Yeah.
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 Societal as a whole.
Right.
Absolutely.
So exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. What do you think some of in your experience, what do you think some of those apprehensions are about when it comes to seeking help?
For men,
Mm-hmm.
there's so much emphasis placed on starting from a very young age, right? Like let's start from the boy, little boy.
Mm-hmm.
The boy cries and they say boys don't cry.
Mm-hmm.
Why don't boys cry? Like what where did this come from?
Mm-hmm.
A a boy and a girl, they're humans, they're children, right? They have emotions. Why can't boys cry? Right? So that like cliche kind of like boys don't cry. So it starts from a very young age and then it gets compounded over and like more and more and more. Like, men don't do this, men don't do that. Don't be I mean, okay, that's a bad word. I won't say it,
Yeah. It's quite
but like don't talk about like don't be a girl, don't act like a
right.
girl, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
it's
Yes.
almost like it's a negative thing, right?
Mm-hmm.
So this is how boys and adolescent boys, little boys and adolescent boys, and then men, young men and men, um, are kind of socialized and conditioned, programmed,
Mm-hmm.
for lack of a better word. Then so then it's like I'm less of a man or I'm not as masculine if I want to talk about my feelings.
Mm-hmm.
I need help, right? So I think that's a really huge part. And men are just kind of, like you said, stoic. They're conditioned to be more stoic, just suck it
Mm-hmm.
up, toughen up, be a man. Like these are so unhealthy. These phrases are such unhealthy phrases, but they make a big impact on the child and adolescent boy, teenager, young adult, even adult man, like growing up. Like it's so unhealthy to hear these messages. I think it's a
Yeah.
big part.
And it starts maybe with the parenting, but then it's compounded by peer. relationships, right? Especially
Yes.
teenage boys and then adults and people, men's groups and those subcultures, right? Where
Yes.
it's now your peers who are reinforcing that, and you get
Exactly.
roasted if you know, show any vulnerability, and that's not always the case, right? But that is oftentimes the case. But
Correct.
I'm on the flip side of that, we're talking about the cost of not getting help, right?
Yeah.
What's at risk when we don't get the help we need, when we don't admit that we're struggling, right? Where do you see that men struggle on the mental health side when they don't get the help?
I mean, at the extreme of it, at the end of the spectrum, it's suicide,
Mm-hmm.
and sometimes homicide.
Mm-hmm.
And this is what I mean by homicide. When there's so much, and I'm not like, I don't want to go into a lot of the details, but just kind of generally speaking, a lot of anger that men are not taught to process and feel and sit with, right?
Mm-hmm.
It keeps getting stored and stored and stored and get repressed. It gets repressed and it gets like stored as like toxic energy. And that energy needs to come out somehow,
Mm-hmm.
you know? Don't get me wrong, it's not any justification for murder. But what I'm saying is that there's a reason that, again, like the discrepancy, right? So many murders and so many violent crimes are committed by men. I think this is part of it, not all of it, but part of it is that men are not taught to process their feelings and sit with their feelings and release them. You have to process, then release. But when you don't, when you're not allowed to process, you're shamed for processing. You just repress and you press and you press, and it gets stored. And then one big like event, traumatic, tragic event can lead to, a very violent
Right.
act of crime.
Expression or releasing of that anger,
Of
right?
that anger in a
Of
completely
impulsivity.
wrong
Yeah,
place. Exactly. Exactly.
absolutely.
Because it was just stored.
It's like that saying, the hair that breaks the camel's back, right?
Hmm. Hmm.
Yeah,
Hmm.
absolutely. And so for men,
Yeah.
what does processing look like? I know as therapists, we understand the term processing, but for our listeners, for maybe men who are listening to this episode and they haven't taken that leap, they haven't asked for help. What does processing look like? How can we kind of demystify, the expectations a bit?
Are you like, should we start from childhood years or like just as a grown adult man? What it
Sure. I
looks
mean, because there's different points of intervention, right? Sometimes children are lucky enough to get plugged into the mental health system when they're young and they get some of that experience. But
like? Mhm.
in my experience, a lot of the time, grown men have no prior mental health experience. They had no touch point before that. So maybe we should start with, grown men, who are
Okay.
considering therapy for the first time. Maybe they're having that, and then we're talking about parenting. Maybe, they just had their firstborn, they're feeling maxed
Mhm.
out, financially stressed, maybe marital stress or single parent,
Yeah.
and they're like, man, I don't know if I can hang, right? And they're thinking about getting help, but there's some apprehension there. Like what can they expect when they first step into a therapy room about the processing aspect of their feelings, like learning how to get in touch with their inner child, their feelings.
Yeah. That's a good question. So I think a good therapist, a therapist that's very in tune, with like the needs of the mental, emotional needs, health and emotional needs of a man, I think would help the man, the client, let go of these like norms or unhealthy beliefs basically, like that I
Mm-hmm.
shouldn't be here, what's wrong, maybe something's wrong with me, am I weak, is something, so I think a good therapist would start from there, is like help that man, the client, release those unhealthy like belief systems,
Mm-hmm. Their
you know
assumptions about
the
how
assumptions,
they're supposed to be, right? How the world
right, all
works,
the
right?
shoulds. I
Yeah.
shouldn't be, like, we have to de-shouldifiy, like,
I like that. Deshouldify. Should coin
Like
that.
all the shoulds. Like, there are no shoulds. Everyone is different. Everyone's unique. There should not like see. I'm shooting right. Like
Hmm.
now I'm doing, but there need not be like all so many shoulds. Like I'm a man, I shouldn't be in this position. I should be stronger. I shouldn't be sensitive. I shouldn't cry. I have so many. I have a lot of male clients right now, interestingly enough. But what I hear a lot is like, I feel so embarrassed that I'm crying right now in session.
Hmm.
You know, like immediately they become so embarrassed for crying. Why? Like, and I tell them, I'm like, why are you embarrassed? It's a human emotion. It's you're just expressing sadness, right? So I think that's where I think that's the first step is to make the person, the man, the male client feel like they can be their authentic selves. And if they're sad, it's okay to cry. And if they're angry, it's okay to express that anger, not aggression. There's a difference
Hmm.
between aggression and anger, right? That's another thing I always help my male clients understand is the difference because a lot of times men repress anger because anger is associated with aggression, violence. No, violence, aggression is a behavior, anger is a feeling.
Hmm.
Feeling doesn't have to turn into a behavior if
I
we
like
sit
that.
with it, if we just sit with it first, you see?
Right.
So then I help them like express their anger. So I'll do role plays. If they have a lot of anger towards their mother, I'll become their mother in a role play.
Hmm. That's
In a
so
sense,
powerful.
yes.
Yeah.
And I'm like, yeah. And then I'll say provoking things that because I know a little bit of their history with their mother. So I'll talk as their mother, and they yell and scream and they cuss, right? Like, and then they say, "Oh my God, I feel so much better now," because they never got to do that.
Hmm.
Because they won't do that with their mother. Most men won't because they don't want to hurt their feelings, they don't want to sever relationships. But where's this anger, where is it being stored? It's being stored
Hmm.
here, you see. So in therapy, for example, that's another way that I help kind of processing.
Absolutely. Wow. That's a
Yeah.
great depiction of what processing looks like, for anyone who's thinking about stepping into this kind of work. And
Mhm.
it makes sense that your caseload is mostly men because you specialize with
Mhm.
men and men's mental health, right,
Yeah.
and conscious parenting.
Mhm.
So it
Yeah.
makes perfect sense your caseload would have more of this population. And I really love how you give that distinction between anger and aggression because I think sometimes it gets muddied, right? When we're talking about the challenges, right? A lot of men will say, "Oh, I have anger issues."
Mhm.
No, you have aggression issues,
Yes. Yes,
right?
exactly. Yes, we all have anger issues. We all have
Right.
anger. Yeah.
Well, and even getting deeper into it, that's my buddy boy growling at who knows what. Oliver, can't you see we're doing a podcast? He's my office
See,
buddy.
he's so conscious. He's like present.
Yes.
He's here.
See, don't be aggressive, Ollie. Listen. So, yeah, talking about anger, it's not even like I mean, it gets such a bad rap, right? But anger is so powerful. And we don't talk enough about constructive anger. I know in my work with men or even women who are struggling with anger, is having this conversation about how can we use anger constructively.
Hmm.
It's oftentimes the catalyst and behind what's behind anger, right? It's usually a
Hmm.
lot of fear. A lot
Exactly.
of anger is fear based, right?
Exactly. Yes.
So
Fear or pain. Fear
pain,
or pain.
yeah,
It masks pain
hmm,
oftentimes or fear. Yeah.
yeah. I heard it said once by a couples therapist that when we're afraid, we get bigger or we get smaller.
Mm.
But sometimes we go inward and sometimes we go outward or we take it out on other people,
Mm-hmm.
right? Inward oftentimes looks like depression.
Hmm. Hmm.
Outward looks like aggression. But
Exactly.
oftentimes we know that's a symptom of depression for men. High irritability, right?
Irritable.
Anger.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yes. Hmm. Hmm.
Yeah.
Exactly. That's why you see more like when men are depressed, they tend to be more irritable, which leads to anger or sometimes
Hmm.
aggression. Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
And like you said, that can sometimes go back to the shoulding and the assumptions and these self-imposed expectations, right? I can't say what I feel.
Hmm.
or,
Hmm.
X, Y, and Z, and so it's this containment, a lot of containment, contain,
Hmm.
and then boom, right?
Right.
So,
Hmm.
yeah. So role play, super powerful. I know that in family
Hmm.
therapy, the empty chair is a
Hmm.
effective, often used intervention, right?
Right.
If this person were here, what would you say to them? But I think role play is even more powerful because
Yes.
then you can really kind of get that dynamic going
Hmm.
about, and that, you know, you bring out the triggers and then you can kind of process it in real time.
Yep.
It's like, oh, what just
That's
happened here? What were you just thinking before you said that? And so
right.
forth.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So when it comes, well, since you are a conscious parenting expert, can you share a little bit with us about what that looks like? What is conscious parenting and why is it important to understand?
Yeah. So the reason I'm so also passionate about conscious parenting is because like if we had more conscious parents, we wouldn't have as much like mental health issues,
Hmm.
right? So it's like
Baggage.
kind of like exactly like and we all have it, right?
Sure.
Um just before our interview today, like I was so nervous. I mean, and it's just like okay, and I realized like my ego is,
Yeah.
at play, right?
Hmm.
What am I feeling? Okay, am I going to be? Am I going to look good? Am I going to say this, smart things, or am I going to be good enough? Right? So we like it's always there, kind of. It's
Hmm.
just a matter of managing, right? So with conscious parenting, so the premise is this: growing up as children, right? We have basic needs, basic physical needs, which is like food, shelter, safety, all that stuff, right? Education. But we also have a lot of we also have emotional needs, emotional psychological needs as children. Most parents don't meet most of those needs, not because they're bad, not because they don't love us, but because they're just not aware. Most people are raised like, parenting is like, make sure your kids go to school, get good grades, they have good clothes and all that stuff, right? They're safe. But historically speaking, and I think this is changing, which makes me really happy that I'm seeing a lot of the shift. But historically, there was not much emphasis on focus on like the emotional needs of a child. So there's a lot of emotional needs, but like the five main ones are: do you see me for who I am,
Hmm.
right?
Hmm.
Or are you trying to mold me into who you want me to be? So this is as a child, this is like what a child is intuitively feeling, right? Do you hear me? Do you hear what I'm telling you? Not what you want to hear.
Hmm.
Am I worthy of your time and undivided attention? Not the one where you're on your phone and you're pretending to play with me,
Hmm.
but the one where
Check the
you
box. Yeah.
everything is away and you're fully present. Exactly, just to check the box. Like, here, see, we played, but like, were you really fully present with your child when you were playing? So the child needs that. The child wants to see that the parent is really present when they're playing. Am I good enough just the way I am, or do I have to be perfect? Do I have to have straight A's? Does my room have to always be clean for me to be good enough? Right?
Hmm.
And then, do you love me unconditionally? Which is kind of related to, similar to, am I good enough? But it's this idea of like, do I have to always do what you ask me to do? Do I have to always be obedient and a good girl or a good boy for you to love me? Or can I
Hmm.
just throw tantrums and disobey and be defiant sometimes, but you still love me? Like every
Hmm.
child is looking for that from their parents.
Hmm.
They really are. And when our parents don't meet these needs, it really messes with our, just with our, well-being, like psychological well-being. So what I do in conscious parenting is I teach parents to first, be aware of those needs, and then also it's the main points of conscious parenting is like connection before correction. So
Oh, I
oftentimes
like that.
parents are very quick
Yeah.
to like punish and be like correct like the behavior. You did this wrong, you have to do it this way. And so there's a lot of power struggles that happen, right? Because again, those emotional needs are not being met. But if you connect with your child first before you correct it, that's a whole different experience. And what's the best way to connect with the child? Play, because that's
Ah,
their language. Play is the child's way of communicating,
Can you say a little more
so
about that? Because I think that's really important for us to kind of grasp, like the language of play.
language of play. So, for example, it's so important to play with the children. Of course, at different ages, you play differently, right? You're
Hmm.
not going to play the same with the 14-year-old as you would with the 4-year-old.
I'm not gonna play Barbies with my teenage daughter. Yeah.
You do?
Said I'm probably not gonna play Barbies with my teenage daughter. Yeah, not that I
Right.
wouldn't, but she probably doesn't want to.
Right. But when she was younger,
Mhm.
did she like
Absolutely.
Barbies?
Yeah.
Okay. So you played with Barbies, right?
Mm.
And then now what does she like to play? Maybe video games? I don't
Hmm.
know. Like she
Like
likes,
Roblox. Yeah.
okay, there we go. So you're playing with her. That's the
Hmm.
important thing. What and it's about the child's needs, not your needs, like not my needs. It
Hmm.
doesn't matter what I need. It's what my child needs, right? So for example, just the other day, I was with my niece. She's almost 4, super smart kid. And she usually when I play with her, I'm like, if she's running, I'm running with her. If she's on the floor, I'm on the floor with her, right? We play, I just follow her lead. And this one particular day, I was very, very tired. It was just last week. I was super tired. And so we were playing on the floor. And then she got up and she started running around like back and forth in the room. And usually I would have gotten up with her and I would have ran with her back and forth. I was tired this day and I just stayed on the floor. And then she looked at me, she goes, Silva, why aren't you playing with me?
Mm.
Do you see?
They're very in tune, right? When you're with them and when you're not.
Few minutes. I didn't like actually do exactly what she needed me to do. And she said, why aren't you playing with me? Mind you, we were playing for over an hour at that time. But
Right.
that's how, like, this is a perfect example. Like, they know exactly when you're in tune with them, you know?
Hmm.
So that's what play is about. It's about being in tune. It's about playing with what they need, not what you need. A lot of parents play with their kids. They'll see, for example, they'll sit like on the couch and the kids on the floor and they'll just kind of in and out, like attention goes in and out. They're on the phone and then they're talking to others and then they play for 2 minutes and then they turn around and have a conversation with the sister or the brother or whatever. That's not what kids need. They don't like that.
Hmm.
They want you to be fully present. So hence
Undivided attention. Right.
undivided attention. Am I worthy of your undivided attention?
Right. And going back to that whole connecting before correcting, it sounds like they're more receptive to hearing correction because we're on the same wavelength through play. Something to that effect. It drops their guard. It makes them more in tune with us.
100%. Exactly. So they're more in tune with us. So then there's no need for correction anymore, even. You get it? So
Mm.
for example, like but it takes time, right? You have to play and like really, really play and really be in tune with the child. You have to really connect. But once that strong, solid connection is built, then you don't have to do a whole lot. It's so easy because then you don't even have to correct. Tell the child like it's time to change the diaper, and then they'll run to the diaper changing station because you have that connection and they just whatever you ask they do, they comply, not out of fear though, but out of
Mm.
connection, out of abundance, not out of fear. So that traditional paradigm of parenting is very fear-based. If I
Mm.
don't do what my mom says or dad says, I'm going to get punished.
Very Machiavellian, right? It's better to be feared than loved, right?
Yeah, exactly. It's not good.
Yeah.
It's not good. So the conscious parenting is like it's again not fear based. So whatever they do out of love and connection and respect, not
Mm.
fear.
Ideally,
'Cause
yeah. So this
that's
could
the
be
only.
applied to any age, right? From toddlers to teens, kind of. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely, exactly. Because there's only so like at some point your teenagers are going to become adults and then what, or even as teenagers at 14, 15, 16, when they start driving, how are you going to control them? What are they
Right.
going to be afraid of, right?
Yeah.
Like you're going to lose this war. Like, I mean, you might win battles, but the war you're going to lose.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
like that analogy. Absolutely, right? Because once they have their independence, that's, they can choose to not spend time with you. They can choose to not
Com-
lend an ear, right?
mhm.
And yeah, and we want our children to be independent, but we don't necessarily want them to learn fear-based reactions either, right?
Right.
We want them to do things on purpose, for a purpose, with intention, make educated decisions, right? And sometimes our attempt to educate our children could be very reactionary, right? And
Mm-hmm.
that touches on something I know that you also are very invested in, that is the inner child, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Or when it comes to our reactions. Can you talk a little bit about the importance of working or healing the inner child as a parent?
Yeah, super important. In order to become good parents, we have to first heal our own inner child. And so the inner child, we all have an inner child. And the inner child is like the psychological concept that is basically the parts of ourselves that hasn't grown up, that still has like emotional wounds, remnants of it. Yes.
Mm-hmm.
And oftentimes when parents get very triggered or angry with their children, it's because something from their inner child is being triggered. You see?
That makes
So
sense.
when as parents we're not we have a lot of unresolved like trauma or emotional wounds, our children are like the biggest triggers for us, like our intimate partners and our children,
Hmm.
right? Like those are
Right.
the
Our
most
closest
intimate.
attachments, right?
Exactly.
The
Which
people's opinions matter to us, right?
exactly, because our exactly right, because our parents were the ones that kind of, you know, where we got the emotional wounding is from our parents. That was our most intimate relationship,
Right.
our very first intimate relationship in life. And so who resembles the most intimate relationships in our adult life is our intimate partners and our children. Yes,
Yeah.
this is why intimate partners and children are the most triggering for parents. Yeah.
Makes a lot of sense. Validation or invalidation, right?
Hmm.
It's a reflection of our sense of worthiness, or in psychology, it was called reflected appraisals, right?
Hmm.
Our
Hmm.
mirrors, right? Of
Right.
validation.
Right,
Yeah.
exactly. And we're constantly seeking it. And
Mm-hmm.
we're even seeking it from children. It's like, don't be bad, because if you're bad, then that's a reflection of me not being a good enough parent. And if I'm not a good enough parent, then I'm not a good enough human, you
Mm-hmm.
know? So this is like one example of how children trigger us.
Yeah. So,
They're, go ahead.
yeah, that makes a whole lot of sense. So sometimes when we get very in our emotional mind as parents and very reactionary to the behavior of our children, it's oftentimes unresolved junk within ourselves that we haven't made peace with, or we are not at least being self-aware, which goes back to the conscious parenting, right? Is self-awareness.
Yes,
Yeah.
correct. Correct. And that's how conscious parenting helps, right? Because it first helps you realize, like, what do I need to change? How do I need to heal still?
Mm-hmm.
How do I need to raise my own inner child still? How do I need to reparent my inner child? I have my inner child and I talk to her all the time. I
Mm-hmm.
know it sounds crazy and woo-woo, but it's true. I have an inner child, and when she acts up, I pause and I talk to her and I say, "You're good enough. You're safe. I love you." And that's how I calm myself down, because I still get triggered all the time. I just connect immediately with my inner child. So that's part of the inner child work, is like teaching the parent how to reparent their inner child to meet those unmet emotional needs. Like, you're good enough. You are good enough. It's okay. You don't have to be perfect. You don't have to be perfect. You're good enough. It's okay to make mistakes. You're still good enough. So that's a big part of conscious parenting, is helping the parent get to that place of healing, so that then they're not so triggered by their child. So they're not in so many power struggles, you know.
Yeah. Self-soothe, right? Be self-aware. What are
Right.
some of the tactical skills parents can use to self-soothe in those moments when they catch themselves kind of being in that emotional mind? Like, how can they calibrate?
Like when they're triggered by their
Mm-hmm.
child,
Yeah, when they're being triggered.
pause. The power of the pause. So you pause and you ask yourself, okay, it helps me. Like, usually closing your eyes helps, but you don't have to. But like, I tell my clients, like, okay, close your eyes and ask yourself, what is this really about? Okay, I'm feeling really angry with when my daughter said she doesn't want to go to violin classes.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, why would that anger me? Right? Like, she doesn't want to go. Like, why is that angering? Okay, so then you close your eyes, you ask, why did this anger me? What is this really about? okay, you try to go back to memories. Like, did I want to go to violin and I never got a chance? Maybe. Or did I, when as a kid, did my parents force me to go to, like, so you have to kind of dig and try to figure out like the connection,
Hmm.
of why this no to violin, for example, is triggering me. So you ask, what is this really about? Is it about my child? Because if it is, then I should just respect that they don't want to go to violin because
Hmm.
she is her own person, right? But why is it angering me that she doesn't want to go to violin? It must be something within me. So then you ask the question and then and then it'll take you to where you need to go.
That makes a lot of sense. So just make sure that you're not mixing up your stuff with their stuff.
Exactly. Exactly.
And
And
then
a
going
lot of
back
times
and then
parents,
going back to that connecting before correcting, right? Connect with why they don't want to go to violin, maybe.
exactly.
What else? Is there something going on? Is there something else distracting them? What kind of headspace are they in? And then correcting if there's like some value based dilemma or conflict going on with your value as a parent versus the value of respecting their wishes. Sometimes those things can be a conflict, right?
Yeah.
Violin's not cheap.
Hmm.
Violin classes, maybe you grew up with certain beliefs around money, right? Money
Hmm.
beliefs and, sacrifices and that kind of thing. Maybe it's a big deal for you to afford their violin classes, but the children can't fathom that. They don't have any concept, what that means. And so again, going back to a lot of those childhood experiences, belief systems, why we parent the way we do and just being really in tune with that. I think that's so important,
Hmm.
right? So
Hmm.
it's kind of this triad, right? It's like you're, you know, validating the inner child, addressing those belief systems,
Hmm.
connecting with your child, and then correcting when needed. Or sometimes correcting, but also communicating your rationale, kind of helping them understand. And on us depends by age, right? Because you're talking about like
Of
younger
course.
kids are very black and white,
Sure.
right? They're dichotomous, as we say.
Hmm.
They internalize everything. Whereas once a kid hits like 13, they're less
Hmm.
dichotomous, right?
Yeah.
They can start to see things from other people's perspectives. So you can start to have those more mature conversations about what it's like to be a parent and your rationale and your value system versus what they're going through. And you can have those more adultish
Hmm.
conversations,
Hmm.
right?
Hmm. Hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
Exactly.
I think that's one of the big challenges of parenthood, right? Is, how we can connect with our kids. Largely it changes, quickly from season to season with their
Hmm.
developmental stages, right? But I think
100%.
if you had mentioned earlier some cornerstones though, and how we connect, and that is through listening,
Hmm.
which sounds like a simple thing, but
I know.
slowing down and
Hmm.
actively listening to what's going on, not making assumptions about what we think is the problem, but actually kind of like we do as therapists, right? When somebody comes in the room and maybe we've read a chart, read some
Yes.
notes, some other stuff,
Hmm.
and we think we have it all figured out before they open their mouth, and then it's like, oh wait, that's not the case at all. There's all this other stuff that wasn't even
Yeah.
captured, or if we take the time to listen, and we do that. We're trained to do that as therapists,
Hmm.
but when it comes to family, friends, like the people closest to us, because there's that enmeshment, oftentimes
Hmm.
we get caught up, right? And those
Right.
emotional triggers.
Right. Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Listening, like hearing and seeing, like seeing your child for who they are. It's so
Yeah.
important also.
Right. Meet them where they're at.
Because when our parent doesn't see us for who we are, that the message that we intuitively kind of like receive is like, we're not good enough then. Because they're clearly not wanting to see me. You see?
Right. Comes off judgmental, invalidating.
Right. It's
Right.
like it's not an intellectual kind of cognitive processing that happens with in a 3, 4, 5 year old, right? But it's this intuitive knowing and inner knowing, like that we all have, especially children. They're very wise because they're
Mm-hmm.
so in tune with their emotion. And there's a lot of wisdom and messages, so many messages and emotions, right? So they feel it. Like if my mom doesn't want to see me for who I am, then I must be a piece of shit, is what I've heard a lot from clients.
Mm.
My mom didn't want to see me for who I am. So I was thinking then I must be like a really bad person or a piece of shit. Like,
Mm-hmm.
sorry for the language,
No, it's all
but
good. Absolutely.
you know, what you see as an adult. Why?
Mm-hmm.
Only because the parent didn't want to see them. So for example, I have a client, he loved to dance. He absolutely loved to dance. And people would see him dancing in like sixth, seventh grade, and they told the parents, like, this kid has talent. You should really put him in dance. The dad said, no, dancing is not for boys.
Mm. Yeah.
Sports are for boys. So then he's like, okay, because I wanted to make my dad proud, I joined basketball, but I hated it. I
Mm-hmm.
hated every day of basketball practice. Well, later, as he became an adult, he got into dancing, and he's a professional dancer.
Mm.
But but he always struggled with that. Like, he didn't dance as a kid, as a teenager, because his dad didn't want to see him that he is a dancer. This
Mm-hmm.
is what he is. He loves dancing. Like, so his dad didn't want to see him for who he was. So he kind of rejected that part of him, and then he went into basketball. You see,
Mm-hmm.
that's not okay.
No, and we can, as therapists, and we're talking to clients, and we can kind of see the development, right? The journey that, in retrospect, moving backwards, hindsight's 2020, right?
Hmm.
As parents, the challenge is making sure that we don't fall into these traps, right? Of
Hmm.
our own junk or our own belief systems interfering with our relationship and being present for that and developing the relationship above our own stuff, right?
Hmm. Hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Great stuff. Silva, thank you so much for sharing about conscious
Yeah.
parenting and the importance of healing the inner child in order to be better parents and being self-aware. I think
Mhm.
wonderful nuggets of wisdom here that you shared with us. And I'm wondering, what can our audience do to learn more about your work and what you're doing?
Yes. So I have a new website that's launching. It'll
Mhm.
launch in about 2 weeks. So maybe by the time this podcast is, posted. But basically, you can contact me at myinnerhealingtherapy.com.
Mm-hmm.
You can also email me at info at um, myinnerhealingtherapy.com. Okay.
Yes.
You can call me at 818-748-9977. I do offer free 15-minute consultations to see if, I can help. And if I can, we can maybe move forward. But once my website is launched, there's a good amount of information on there to learn more about like conscious parenting and inner healing, inner child healing therapy.
That's wonderful. Thank you so much. I know you're active on LinkedIn as well. And
Yeah.
so, other other therapists on here who want to learn more and connect with you on a professional level can definitely reach out to you there,
Mhm.
right?
Thank you. Thank you, Patrick.
Yeah, this is your LinkedIn, yeah,
Yes,
and
that's
your
fine.
website's being updated, so that's your old
It's being,
website, yeah.
yes,
Okay,
yes. So in about 2 weeks, mid-October, it should be launched.
cool. All right, very good. Well, very excited to have had you on. You're always welcome back on if you want to share some more. And once your website launches and you want to
Mhm.
continue to share the work you're doing, and you're always welcome on board.
Thank
So,
you.
thank
Thank
you.
you.
It's been an honor and a privilege. And with that, I wish you a fantastic week.
Thank you, Patrick. Bye.